Confronting Mainstream Narratives. Today, we are lucky enough to be joined by Dr. Amir Peleg, Chief Historian for the Claims Conference in Israel and member of Yad Vashem's Public Council. With a rich background in historical research, Amir has spent over a decade advocating for Holocaust survivors' rights and compensation. Amir, alumni of Ben Gurion University, has a doctorate in Jewish history and was a founding editor of the historical journal Yisraelim. He resides in An Habesor, a peaceful moshav in Eshkol Regional Council, dedicating his life to history as both an educator and a scholar. It's an honor to be speaking with you, Amir. It really is.
Thank you.
So where you live is not far from Gaza.
Yeah, I live in Moshav Ein Absor, which is in Eshkol Regional Council in the Western Negev of Israel. Eshkol is the regional council that have the longest border with Gaza Strip. And on October 7, we were attacked very badly. My own community was attacked. Other communities, neighbor communities, also many of my friends were killed and
Wow.
murdered. And my moshav is like 6 kilometers from the border. So the terrorists arrived. The Hamas terrorists arrived to our moshav about 1 hour after everything began, and so we had some time to get organized, and few guys managed to confront the Hamas terrorists, and there was a battle on the gate of our moshav. Eventually, the Hamas withdrew from our moshav, but
wow,
yeah, we're still living in the October 7. Yeah.
Were you there when Hamas attacked?
Yeah, I was here with my family, my kids. We were in the shelter during all the day, getting the WhatsApp messages from all our friends in the kibbutzim and moshavim about what's happening, and yeah, it's a really hard day to remember. And we came back to live here. My wife stayed here all the time due to her work, and I was with the kids for 2 months outside of the moshav, but we are back here and trying to survive, let's say.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us, and it's such difficult circumstances to live in. Is it because of the war? Is it more secure now than it was because of the Israeli ground assault? Do you have like a buffer now between, do you feel safer now?
First of all, I don't live in fear now when I live now 6 kilometers from Gaza, but the big problem of October 7 is the trust between me as Israeli citizen that live in the border and between my army and my intelligence services, and the way they missed everything on October 7th, then it's very hard for me living on the border, but I think for most of the Israelis to regain the trust, because when we went to sleep on October 6th, we felt the safest in the world, and we knew that we have the $1 billion, fence, the most progress fence and border in the world, and we know that the IDF is there and the Israeli Mossad and Shabak are there, and then Hamas went in, and for almost 8 hours, nobody came to help us. The IDF took about 7 to 8 hours even to arrive. Then we live like 30 minutes from Be'er Sheva and less than an hour from Tel Aviv. We don't live in Alaska or in, I don't know. So yeah, it's very hard time in Israel because you have to gain the trust. And in Israel, as you know, to live when you don't trust the army and the other intelligence services, it's not easy. But But we are tough, we are Israelis, we are Jews, we've been through horrible things and we know how to be back on our feet, and that's what we're trying to do and trying to show it to our kids, to our communities. And yeah,
Well, thank you. And I think you even doing this podcast under such difficult circumstances is really just an amazing show of resilience.
thank you.
It's nice to speak to someone from the Claims Conference as well, because the Claims Conference has been really important to me because when I
Hmm.
was a teacher, Claims Conference money helped me go to the first time I went to Israel was Claims Conference money.
Really, wow.
Oh, yeah, there's a teacher training organization, so they paid for me to go and do a scholarship at Yad Vashem, and I spent 10 days in Jerusalem. Actually, I think it was about 5 days in Jerusalem, 5 days in Tel Aviv, and then went and had some amazing education in Yad Vashem, which you're also linked to as well.
Yeah.
Um, Yad Vashem is one of my favorite places on the planet. I've been back there for a teacher conference. I love Yad Vashem. It's such an important place to me. I think maybe a separate podcast just talking about the claims conference. Me and Eva were saying might be good because it's such an interesting topic. Has the current situation affected your work with the claims conference at all?
Um, no, I work as the historian and mostly work on specific files for Holocaust survivors, trying to solve these files. And not exactly, because we still, not many Holocaust survivors are living between us, and not so many applications for compensations are now. But we're dealing with the most complicated cases that were not solved, and I'm trying these issues not to affect my work, because every Holocaust survivor that we manage to give him money and compensation, and when he is recognized by us, he then get another, accept the compensation, he get a lot of services around. So I'm trying to do my best to focus on this work, and I know the claims conference gave several extra funds for Holocaust survivors that live in the Gaza envelope region, and now they gave to all the Holocaust survivors in Israel another a program of compensation, and so we're trying to do our best in this situation, because
I think that is for me that is a form of resistance as well because I'm a historian of the Holocaust and resistance during the Holocaust. And what the Nazis wanted to do, they want to destroy, not just they don't just want to kill you, they want to destroy your way of life, they want to destroy your spirit. So if you can carry on doing the things that are important to you and affecting change and making good change in the world, then that is resisting what they want you to do. Because Hamas don't want you to keep on living your life or helping people or making the world a better place. They just want to destroy everything. So you are resisting them in continuing to do your important work. So I commend you for that. And Eva as well, you've got a link to you've got a relationship with the claims conference as well, haven't you?
Well, my father used to get the compensation from the claims conference, which
Really?
was it was a family story because when he applied for it, then he didn't get, and then my friend started to work in Tel Aviv at the office, and then she was the one who investigated that there was two files I mean, one file on two similar names, so. So there was another person with the same name in Hungary who was the same age as my father, and then they mixed up their files. So then she sorted it out, my friend, and then actually my father got in contact with that other person with the same name in Hungary, and they became friends, which was a very interesting thing that through the claims conference they got. I have another friend who is working there, also from Hungary. He's the one who is working with the Hungarian files now, and yeah, and then I was talking about him that he used to be an English and math teacher in Hungary, and then his English is very very beautiful, and then maybe we could interview him as well.
Yeah, I think there's got to be a later podcast on the claims conference. Let's move into the meat of the matter of why we are talking today. So I've got a few slides I want to share with you. So just let me know if you can see this presentation. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So the reason that me and Éva really started this series, and this is more personal, is the current situation. I'm wanting to do something in reaction to what I'm seeing happen around me. This is a picture that I've personally taken when I was out for a walk in a place called Hebden Bridge in England, very just a rural place. You go for a walk, and then we went to a pub and sat down and had a drink, and then I see this sign up, and this is just a reflection of what's going on in England, but it's also a reflection of the insanity as well, and the lack of logic, and the inversion of decency. This sign, so first of all, just I don't want to spend lots of times on these images, but so there's completely accepted Hamas numbers here. So if Hamas are going to go into a place and they're going to rape and murder people, they're going to murder children, then surely they're also capable of giving wrong data. And you can see the emphasis, 27,230, so murdered. So none of these, apparently to this person, none of these people were other men that died in combat. All of them somehow were murdered. And this is another photograph that I took myself as well.
It's the same handwriting.
Yeah, it's probably the same. Like, I'd like to think that she was just completely mad, but this is mainstream, and that's the title of our podcast series, Constructing Mainstream Narratives. This is a little bit extreme. Like, stop the 75-year Holocaust against Palestinians. So just one thing, in the last 75 years, the population of Palestine has increased by 10 times. So it's not a very successful Holocaust if a population increases by, like, the world population has increased massively by 3 times. Population of Palestine in the last 75 years by 10 times, and she feels that that's a Holocaust. But in that, it's touching upon why we're talking in the first place. It's this use of language, these words. We're going to be talking about Zionism later, but it's placing this word Holocaust in there to get that emotional reaction and to mislead people and completely misrepresent what's happening. So I spend a lot of time in Westminster, and I thought this was a really disgusting moment. Actually, I wasn't here for this, but this is just round the corner from where I spend a lot of time, and I hope we don't look back on this moment, because the police did nothing about this as well, and there's cheering crowds whilst a genocidal statement is projected onto one of the most culturally important places in England. And these marches go on every weekend. And I think one thing that I would like to say is that there's 2 sides here. And I am one side, and what you can see now is completely the opposite to who I am and what I think is right. And it makes me wonder, like, what is motivating this woman to do this? You can imagine that you can imagine her at home making this sign. What has led her to make this sign? And it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But what I can have a good guess at is that she doesn't do this silently. She tells everybody, "I'm going to a pro-Palestinian march." It's almost like a a part of her identity, a fashion statement almost. You can
Yeah.
like some of
Can
these.
I add something?
Yeah, please do. Yeah,
Um, I always try to separate anti-Semitism and and criticism about Israel, because I think me myself can criticize my country and my government, and Israel doing sometimes things that you can do much better. But I think it's connect us to the issue of Zionism, because and we will talk about it later. When you understand why the Jews in Europe, why the Zionist movement started in the 19th century, it was out of distress, out of the understanding they cannot, they try to assimilate the emancipation, etc. They try to become part of the society, but the society, when they were most assimilated, kicked them out. So these young Jews in Europe, Western and Eastern, said to themselves, okay, when we were just the Jews on the side, on the spot, with the Jewish traditional clothing, we were persecuted as Jews, traditional Jews. Now, when we are assimilated, the persecution is even worse. And then they said, okay, we need a third solution, which become later Zionism. And when we're looking at the criticism about Israel, I think we can have some kind of comparison here, because when an Israeli like me, which is from the left side of Israel and can critique Israel, is looking at these pictures, and I was in Slovakia not long ago, and the historian there that was talking in the conference, the Slovakian historian also said it, that eventually there is only one country in the world that got this kind of demonstrations. We can now talk about 10 countries or even more that doing even, much horrible things and don't have the context of the October 7th to do this. Let's take Russia. You don't see this huge Russia demonstration every day, or China with the concentration camps. And I can give you, so eventually it's make you think, like, I guess maybe we're thinking what the first Zionists thought about, okay, if all the world is focusing only on Israel now, then something is wrong here and we have to rethink everything.
yeah, and well, history in a way is repeating itself,
Yeah.
and there's lots of British Jews now that are saying, I'd rather just be in Israel, even though there's a war going on, and there's several genocidal groups gathering on Israel's border. Essentially, there's genocidal regimes completely around Israel's border. And then there's Iran funding this all as well. But some British Jews are like, I'd rather just be in Israel rather than here. And this is in Westminster. This is the heart of our democracy. And this usually takes place on a Saturday. There was a big, what's called Al-Quds demonstration the other day, which is like, it started in Iran and now it's instigated by Iran in our country as well. And little Iranian agitators and Hamas supporters initiate this. But this goes on in the Saturday in the daytime. If, like, I'm not Jewish, I wouldn't take my family to Westminster if this is going on. You cannot be around this. But if I was a Jewish fan, would I go sightseeing in Westminster on a Saturday if I was Jewish? Absolutely not. It's not safe. Like the way that they behave and the logic, you can tell. Like this sign as well. This person has no understanding of history, like objective facts. We're not talking about interpretation here. October the 7th, what about 1947? What, when Israel accepted the partition plan and the Arab countries surrounding it invaded to destroy? So how, like, this is objective history. I'm not putting any kind of spin in it. 2005, what, when Israel left the Gaza Strip, ethnically cleansed its own population from the Gaza Strip. it borders on ridiculous, and the fact that you often see children here as well, and you wonder how informed are these children, and why are you taking your children along? And this is like a classic example, and I haven't cherry-picked this. I've seen these marches with my own eyes, and so you can see they've often got their faces covered as well, and it's always completely just a completely aggressive thing that they're doing as well.
Now, what is more amazing is that these people all around Europe and in the United States, they support a Islamic terrorist organization,
Yeah,
jihadist, that is a charter called for Holocaust, for genocide.
yeah,
Hamas charter called for genocide. That it's not so. As I say, unfortunately, the IDF didn't protect us in this October 7th day, but eventually they came in and they murdered babies and women and raped, and they came to the most peaceful communities in Israel that sit in the borders of Israel, not that I can agree with these things in other places, but they came into Israel, as you said, after we left it on 2005. And these people are really supporting a genocide, and it's really unbelievable.
it is unbelievable. Yeah, and
So, can I ask something, please? Amir, you were saying already the second time that the police or the IDF didn't come to help for 8 hours. Do you have an explanation for that?
No, I was a soldier myself in the IDF. I know exactly how it works, and something really bad happened this day. I don't think they can explain, and they didn't even try to explain yet after 6 months. What took them so long? How come forces didn't burst in? No good explanation.
no, I think we have to. There will have to be an inquest into that for any Israelis to feel safe, especially at the border again.
Yeah.
Someone I know did a podcast with a woman that was in the IDF 20 or even 30 years ago, and the technology, even back then, she was saying that even if a cat gets close to the border fence, then they're informed of it.
Yeah.
Right. So who knows how that was allowed to happen? Let's have a look at a few more slides before we get into our main topic. So yeah, I was talking to Éva earlier as well about I normally I spend a lot of time in Westminster, and I've just shown you a pro-Palestinian demonstration. So I walk home from the heart of Westminster once a week.
This is a pro-Israel demonstration, no?
It's a vigil, a pro-Israeli thing. So I walk home from Westminster once a week, and I usually go by the River Thames to walk to the train station. But yesterday when I was walking home, for some reason, I was like, actually, I'm going to walk the longer way right through the middle of London. And then 5 minutes after I made that decision, I came across this vigil, which was for the hostages. And one thing I'd like to say is compared to the video that I've just shown you and the pro-Palestinian, or let's just like pro-Hamas demonstrations that go on nearly every weekend, just the way that this demonstration, well, this vigil, this gathering was carried out in comparison to these pro-Hamas events that are going on every week. They get up on war memorials, they desecrate war memorials, they scream, they shout, they have the most profane signs, they intimidate people. This was very, very peaceful and respectful. And I think in that you really do see the two different sides to what's going on, to this argument at the moment, to this situation. Now, moving towards what we're going to be talking about now, we're going to be talking about Zionism. And you can see in the middle, we've got an example of how this word is used. So the dogs of the Zionists. So I'm trying. Oh, and this, I just thought this sign was from the river to the sea. So genocidal, single democratic state, Palestine, the only just solution. So how many democratic states are there in the Middle East at the moment? There's one. So if we, like, what happened when the Israelis left the Gaza Strip? Was that a democratic state? So
No.
it's just, but this shows the thinking of these people. It's not based. There's no reality in there. It makes absolutely no sense at all. And I'm trying to stay objective here. Obviously, I'm very firmly on one side of this, but objectively speaking, and somebody has sat around and made that sign, sat around and taken the time to make that sign. And these are the people that are on our streets every single weekend in the heart of our democracy. Able, and then they're not being arrested either. And from the river to the sea is not even a thinly veiled genocidal statement. It is genocidal completely.
Yes.
And there's no way to see it any other way. And then they're wearing hoodies, and there's this American, like a psychotic American, who set himself on fire, and apparently to them he's a martyr now. So to set yourself on fire whilst you're screaming like delusional madness is something that should be celebrated. And then here we get to the Z word that we're here to speak about now. Anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. Well, I think it. I would like to see an example of someone that says they're not an anti-Zionist and they're actually not an anti-Semite, because I don't see how those two things could be separate. I can't imagine meeting anybody and say, oh yeah, I'm just an anti-Zionist, and then me speaking to them for 5 minutes and not finding out that they were an anti-Semite. I'm like, what, and this also, what is this woman doing? Like, this has become like a fashion statement.
Yeah.
And she'll be telling all her friends, yeah, I was at the pro-Palestinian march. Like, she's not doing this silently. She's telling everybody she knows that she was here. She's posting it on social media. It's trendy, it's cool. And she's complicit in the most extreme form of Islamic fundamentalism. I never thought I would see something like this.
Yeah, but I want to ask you, Jonny, because I just read an article in a Haaretz website, and they're talking about the boycott that artists and singers and academic so I think you're focusing on this demonstration, but it's much deeper. The most democratic liberal organizations treat the citizens of Israel now, they are really boycotting them due to October 7 and what happened now in Gaza. And they don't even think about saying, okay, there is a war between two sides. You can argue this side is right, the other one is wrong. But what they're doing, what you see in the streets, I think it's even worse in the academy, in the cultural institutes, etc., etc. And interesting for me to understand from you that live now in Europe and can maybe can explain how come that all these institutes also can't find themselves to be enough Democrats and liberal and also joining these demonstrations, maybe in even worse ways, because they just say to Jewish people, Israeli people, you can come here, you can lecture here, you can dance here, you can show your movie here, etc., etc.
Yeah, it's disgraceful, and that has boycott Israel has been of the BDS movement has been obviously it's been going on for some
Yeah,
years now. There's close links to Hamas and Hamas supporters in the BDS movement. There's been musicians such as Roger Waters who said that we shouldn't go to Israel, and what they're saying is basically Jews don't deserve music. And whenever I see boycott Israel, I don't know if most of the people that support this movement, I just think of the first ever institutionalized move against the Jews in Nazi Germany, which was, of course, the boycott of Jewish shops and businesses. I don't know. So that's just what I think. Like, you're not the first person to think of this. And then the Arabs did it as well in 1948 as well. So it's been a tactic of people that wish to destroy Israel since the Nazis and actually before. I think the reason I think this could probably deserve another podcast, but
yeah,
why liberal people get involved in this is their ideas of um, oppressor and oppressed that are used to simplify narratives and basically the world. So if one side is powerful and the other are weak, then the weak must be righteous and the powerful must be the people that
yeah,
deserve that deserve our persecution. So because Israel have developed a strong military because they want to survive, and Hamas has spent its money building terror tunnels and launching missiles into Israel and hasn't built any sort of economy or infrastructure. Um, and they try and they try and Hamas try and market themselves as separate from Iran and all the other Arab states. That this is a territorial solution. It's not a religious solution. This is us. We're the freedom fighters against this Goliath.
yeah,
And that's the narrative that people are seeing in these institutions and that these artists are seeing. And it's also Israel is associated with America and this language of colonialism as well as being used against Israel. So they're seen as these like colonial giants that need to essentially need to be destroyed because they're oppressing as an innocent population. And this has been the success of the propaganda campaign because the Arabs obviously weren't able to militarily defeat Israel, so they've poured billions and billions of dollars into creating this narrative of victimhood, where somehow in this struggle, the Arabs are the underdogs. Although there's 9 million Jews and they're surrounded by 400 million Arabs.
yeah.
Um, so let's keep on going into Zionism then. So Zionism,
Let me just add something,
yeah,
just to refer back to what to the thought of Amir, what he said
yeah.
before. That it's a very interesting phenomena what I'm experiencing right now. That I thought that history is about the past, and now I understand that history is about the present. It's about how they teach it and how they perceive it, and how I on my way try to understand the other side is that on under the posts of famous people who would go against Israel already in October, like Rupi Kaur, the Canadian poet with Indian origin, I started to comment on her anti-Israel posts, which lacked brain and history knowledge, and then I got a lot of comments on my comment that I am being a Nazi, and it was very clear. It was very clear that I live in Israel and I am Jewish, and they called me the Nazi. But I wanted to understand their reasoning, and it was every comment was a new thing for me. How they perceive history, it's a totally defected history. What they learn. Yeah.
In the Hamas Charter, I've read the Hamas Charter a couple of times. The Hamas Charter accuses Israel of being Nazis. Specifically, it calls the Jews Nazis in the Hamas Charter. So I think it's about.
But this is a very good how we can bond now our topic to Zionism, the Zionism to this, because in the birth of Zionism there was a lot of criticism against it, how it's such a racist thing.
Yeah,
right?
that's a very good transition to the next slide. Before we get onto the history, I just want to spend just another little moment trying to understand what these people think when they're using the word Zionism, and that's what I'm really like, what does Zionism mean to these people? And what I think is that Zionism, the word, has just been used as a vehicle for all of these ancient tropes about Jewish people. So that Jewish people are greedy, that they're powerful, that they're malicious, that they're violent. All of these tropes have just been contained into that word, and it's just been completely detached from reality and its historical context. And I came across this. And I wasn't searching for long for this. This is one of the first things I came up for. And this is the website looks pretty well made. It's quite well established. It's certainly not illegal. It hasn't been taken down. And this guy, Nazim Ahmed, has written an article called Anti-Zionism is Now a Protected Belief in Britain. Time for a Reckoning for the Pro-Israeli. And he's written a load of awful stuff. Like on October the 8th, he was writing stuff blaming the Israelis for October the 7th. Just obviously quite a dreadful human being. I think it's interesting and informative because I think this gives us an insight into what these people are thinking. So straight away, Zionism is a form of racism, and you can tell. Like, this isn't the worst thing he does, but this bugs me. He thinks he's clever because he uses semicolons all the time. You can't write a sentence or a title without a semicolon. like look, there's every sentence he writes is a semicolon. Anyway, Zionism is a form of racism, right? So I absolutely don't accept that at all. Like, I am a Zionist, of course I am. So you're calling me racist? There are many, many different nuances to Zionism. I think we'll touch upon today, many, many different forms and approaches to Zionism. So just Zionism is a form of race. So if you accept this, then, and you keep reading, yeah, okay, I accept that, then what is your understanding? It's just so grossly oversimplified and misrepresented. It's a fantasy. It's just a mad fantasy, and this is mainstream. Like I said, the series of this podcast is challenging mainstream narratives, and I believe that this is the mainstream understanding of what this word means. The ideology which underpins the occupation state. So we've got racism, occupation state now, calls for ethnic cleansing. Israel calls for ethnic cleansing and disenfranchisement of non-Jews in favor of Jews. Zionism seeks to transform historic Palestine. Just a meaningless, completely meaning. If I could ask him anything about this, and I wouldn't speak to this person because he lives in a different world. He lives in a completely different reality. So there's no point me having a conversation with him. But if I could, I'd just go up to him and say, okay, what do you mean by historic Palestine then? I'm sure I would just get absolute garbage back. Into Greater Israel. It's racist, so it's racist aspirations. So Zionism ideologically to bound to lead to the practices of apartheid. So another buzzword. So you can see, like, it's these words that they inject or interject that are just to touch buttons, emotional buttons, like, oh, I hate apartheid bad. And then somehow you're like, okay, Israel Jews bad. Yeah. Genocide as well, apartheid and genocide, which is the most ridiculous accusation that has been leveled at Israel since the war began, in pursuit of territorial control in it. So this, for me, is hate speech. If the police are watching this, they need to go and find where he lives and they need to lock him up straight away. Because if somebody reads this and they accept this, then surely against someone like me who reasonably says, yeah, I'm a Zionist. So this would mean that, like, if you accept this to be the truth, then surely violence should happen to me as a Zionist. If I'm genocidal, if I support apartheid, if I'm racist. So framing people in a country as genocidal and an apartheid regime and racist, what it does, it legitimizes violence, extreme violence, any mean. What they say is resistance by any means against this, and it's this word that is so probably the most important word of that's being circulated at the time. And this isn't just like people that are writing articles for websites like this. Like Amir was saying, this is the institution. So this is a university professor, David Miller, and this was him at the Al-Quds March last weekend. And this is a speech that he gave in a university in 2022. So the need to end Zionism. We cannot speak about Palestine until we remove this terrible Zionism from this country. 2,000 Zionist organizations, every single one needs to be ended. He claimed that Zionism has been embedded into British politics. And then it's been embedded apparently into the Ministry of Defense as well.
Well, it's like the protocols of the Elder of Zion, it's the same anti-Semitism exactly.
Yeah.
And
that's like there was a child that I showed on the PowerPoint slide earlier, and she's using a karaoke microphone, and it's understandable that that child would be completely delusional because she hasn't lived a life, she doesn't have any qualifications, but he's a professor at a university.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a position of responsibility, and he's talking in a way that I think he should be sectioned into an asylum, because he's going out and he's saying that in public. It doesn't make any sense. It's completely warped. And we've gathered here to talk about the contemporary issues, but also to kind of put some meaning back into what this word Zionism means. And
so let's ask Amir, what does Zionism, where does Zionism come from, and who invented it, and to which social class did the first followers belong? Is it okay, Jonny?
Yeah,
if we ask Amir?
I think that's a great question. Yeah, if you can, yeah.
Yeah, Zionism, the movement developed in the 19th century, in the middle of the 19th century, in Western Europe and in the Russian Empire.
Don't we call it Central Europe?
Central, mostly Central, right? Central, little bit Western, but Central Europe. But mostly it's became a real political movement in Eastern Europe, in the Russian Empire, and the reason what drove Zionism to become a movement and to understand that the Jewish need to take their own destiny by their own hand and create a national movement was a long historical process that were combined together in the middle of the 19th century, and where the movement of enlightenment in Europe, together with of course the basic is the French Revolution, and then the spring of the nation in 1848, it all caused some kind of effect that drove also young Jewish men and women to understand that they need to take their own destiny and to create their own path in history. Because what happened?
Yeah, go on.
What happened is that for so many centuries, the Jews were almost identified by their religion. They were not secular Jews. They were not until the 18th century. Jews almost didn't study in universities, and they were focusing on being a small community on, we can say, on the side of history.
I think it's like I mentioned to you, Yehuda Alcala, and I think he's really, really interesting starting point. I was fascinated when I started to learn about his like religious and spiritual Zionism and the difference between him and many other. He was a Sephardic rabbi from Serbia.
Yes.
And there was one of the main differences, one of the things that made his thought radical was this active position towards the redemption in Israel, whereas a lot of other Orthodox Jewish thinkers were thinking that the Messiah will come and then we will go back to the Holy Land, whereas Yehuda Alcala is saying, no, there needs to be these preparatory steps. We need to go there first, establish Jewish colonies there in preparation for the coming of the Messiah.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting how this fresh perspective that he had on it. And this idea of Jewish colonies as well, like I think we have to understand this in its historical context as well. Palestine at this point, the area, the region, Palestine, was not a nice, welcoming place to live. There was a population at the beginning of the 19th century of whole Palestine of around 250,000 people. It was quite a harsh and unforgiving place to live. And that's why the population there wasn't so big. But there was that continuous Jewish presence in the land, wasn't there?
Yeah, so Rabbi Alcala and Rabbi Kalischer, that are like the first, they consider to be, together with Moshe Haas, that lived in Germany, to be the first one that talked about that. They still didn't have the word Zionism, but they were the first to talk about it and talking about how practically we have to go back to the land of Israel and create a state to the Jews. But they were talking about it mostly Kalischer and Alcala were talking from a deep religious point of view. Alcala was talking about Mashiach. In the Jewish tradition, there is Mashiach ben Yosef, and Mashiach ben David. And they say that Mashiach ben Yosef will come and will show the way to Mashiach ben David. That will be the real Messiah. And what Alcala and Kalischer and others, they saw like Mashiach ben Yosef. They say we have to make the first step in order the Messiah to come, but these steps and the Messiah will come only when the Jews will be back in the land of Israel, in the promised land. So that drove them from a religious point of view to push to these ideas of Zionism and of the Jewish people have to go back to Israel. He was talking about the number of 22,000 Jews that will come to Israel, and then the Messiah ben David will arrive. So it was a mix of ideas that came from nationalism and from religious background.
And also a response to persecution as well, because
Yes, of course.
Alcala's thought was really galvanized by the Damascus affair of 1840. And the
Right.
Damascus affair was when an Italian monk and his Muslim servant went missing in Damascus, and the Christians blamed the Jews for this. So the Jewish quarter was raided. Some Jews, it seems, just by random, were taken, tortured.
Yes.
Some made confessions under torture that they had indeed murdered this Italian monk to take his blood as for ritual purposes, to bake into Passover bread. Obviously, a just completely forced confession. One of the people that was forced to confess was actually a baker. So you can almost imagine that the Ottoman or the Egyptian authorities targeted him. He's a baker, so they've used his blood. And then he confessed that a very prominent and important Jewish family had also been involved. So you can see why that confession would be forced out of him, because they want to go after this prominent Jewish family. And then the Damascus affair is really interesting, actually, and I think it's a really important historical event.
Yes.
Because there was an international outcry, and Jews it spread around the world what was happening in Damascus at the time, and eventually some of these Jewish prisoners died under torture. Some confessed, and eventually they were.
It was very important also because it shows, communities, Jewish communities from all around the world were unite in fighting this Damascus blood label, and suddenly they saw that they are not separate, but they can get together and involve and make a change. And I think you're right. It's very important because it was one of the first times in the modern history that the Jewish communities around the world felt that they have some kind of power of standing up together for the rights, for the brothers, and it's also Kalisher and also Haas and also El-Kalai. Three of them are talking about the Damascus affair as something that was making them like think again about everything, and it's also important to know that El-Kalai, for example, was in a rabbi in the city of Zemun in Serbia. And there he was experiencing the Serbian nationalists in 1848. So you can see how you have a few processes that are going together. You can talk about the blood label, about feeling what is it to see the Jews around the world uniting around something. You can see how it take out from the nationalists from the spring of 1848. And this is what is interesting in the Zionist movement, that they took the elements from all kinds of places and all kinds of different, from the Jewish people and the Jewish tradition, and from the people they live inside, the locals and their national aims and fights, and it's all became one idea eventually of how we find a solution to what they call the Jewish question or the Jewish problem. And I think what is important to understand that the Jews, they themselves talk about the Jewish question or the Jewish problem. They understood in the middle of the 19th century, or mostly in the 1880s, that something is wrong, something is not working. And then they came up with this idea of Zionism. But it's always very important to remember that there were really few of them. Most of the Jews didn't think about Zionism. Most of them, if things got really bad, as we know in Europe, they just decided to live and immigrate to United States mostly. Some of them decided to become Christians. So they say it will solve the issue. and some of them become like they kept the Jewish identity but became local nationalists and say we have to support our own countries and it will pay up in the future for the Jews and we will have our own rights. So there was a lot of different processes that unite together.
So there is a question here what I would like to ask you, Amir. If you hear me, can you hear me?
Yeah, there is a really...
Yeah, there's a big sound here, Jonny. I guess that there's work constructions in your street, right?
Not where I am, no.
No, so that's then it's from the technology somehow.
Yeah.
Something is going wrong here. So what I wanted to ask you, Amir, so this is where the concept of the nation or the religion comes up. What you were talking about for example, or Jonny was talking about it, that an ultra-Orthodox person, for example, a Satmar Hasid, would not consider themselves part of the Jewish nation, right? Because they see Judaism as a religion and not as a people. The nation is a modern concept for them and has nothing to do with Judaism. And it was Herder who invented the national consciousness 200 years ago, which has to do something with the language but then so my question is, how can we group Zionists? When do we start calculating Zionist, religious Zionism, or spiritual, cultural Zionism, political Zionism? Where are these groups? Do they interfere with each other?
Yes, everything is connected because it started as a really, it was movement, as I said, in Central Europe and in different places in Eastern Europe that somehow unite. Now, the big event that united them was in 1881, what we call Sufot Banegev, storms in the south. It was a huge pogroms in Eastern Europe. Now, Zionism or Jewish nationalists that started to think about it in Western Europe or Central Europe, as you said, mostly, were not so organized. But what happened is that in Eastern Europe, there was a mass Jewish population, and they started the emancipation. They started to get into the local society very late, like only in the middle of the 19th century. And then in 1880, when this big pogrom occurred in Russia, they suddenly understood that they're in a big problem. They understood that all the things they try to do, they try to assimilate, they try to be part of the local education, like being educated, and also educate what we call Haskalah, which is the Jewish movement of enlightenment that try to bring a new values into Jewish society. And what they felt, and it's really similar eventually to what Benjamin Zev Herzl felt, is that, and I mentioned it before, as much as they assimilate, as much as they become part of the society, as much as they become educated, and they wear the same clothes, and they go to the same jobs, and they can walk now, and they can be lawyers and doctors, and can be scholars in university. But on the other hand, the anti-Semitism only grows. The pogroms still happen. The local government supports these people who do the pogroms. And eventually they sat and said, the two very important figures before Herzl were Pinsker and Lilienblum. Okay? And what they understood, because they were really, it's like insulted. It's insulted them. They say, we wanted to be part of your society. We wanted to assimilate. We wanted to have the same human rights. We wanted equality. And now you are not only stopping us from being part of your communities, we also murdering you and help the locals to get you out. Now, they describe it, it's like, I want to try and find something that Pinsker wrote, because Pinsker wrote a book, very interesting book, named Auto Emancipation. Like,
Yeah, the pamphlet, the German language pamphlet, and yeah, you
yeah,
mentioned earlier I think we should expand a little bit on the pogroms of 1881 because Pinsker, by the time the pogroms of 1881, I think he was born in 1820, so he was 61. He had tried
yeah,
emancipation, and he was an advocate for emancipation throughout his entire life. He was a
yeah,
doctor.
yeah,
He really had tried. And
that's
then
right.
the pogroms of 1881, there was the assassination of Tsar Alexander II, and the Jews were blamed, and there were lots of economic problems in Russia at the time. So it was convenient to blame Jews for this, and there were over 200 separate incidents throughout the Pale of Settlement, what we would call now modern day Ukraine and Poland. And this was obviously completely distressing to Leon Pinsker.
Yeah,
And he wrote this German language pamphlet. I've got a quote here actually. He says, "We must not consent to play forever the hopeless role of the wandering Jew. It
yeah,
is a truly hopeless one, leading to despair. When an individual finds himself despised and rejected by society, no one wonders if he commits suicide." And the the pamphlet itself is it's a very emotive and powerful pamphlet, and you can tell this guy's upset and distress are palpable. You can feel it when you hear it. And he's saying, and I always find it really profound as a historian of the Holocaust to read this in 1882, because I know in 60 years' time, I know the Holocaust is coming, and he's looking into the future, and he's saying, we need to get somewhere safe. And obviously he was right, because we know what happened in the killing fields of Russia. We know what happened in the Pale of the Settlement during World War II. All of his worst nightmares came true, and if people had have listened more to what these people were saying, then the biggest catastrophe in human history could have been averted.
Yes, but as we said, Zionism was a real minority in the Jewish world until the Holocaust. The Holocaust, it's really sad, yeah, but the Holocaust made the Zionism, many people to understand that the Zionism was the right solution, but they understood it, as we said, too late. But eventually, the infrastructure that the Zionist movement, since Pinsker, Lilienblum, Alkelai, has built in the land of Israel, because after, what is interesting in Pinsker and Lilienblum is that they not only write, they also started to act and build some kind of political movement, which we called as Chovevei Tzion, the lovers of Zion, which was the first conference was in 1884 in Katowice. And they came, about 40 delegates came from Eastern Europe, Germany, England, and Shmuel Moaliver, which was a rabbi from Bialystok, also a Zionist Orthodox rabbi. He was talking there and gave them the keynote speech in this Katowice conference. And he was talking about these ideas of Alkalai, Kalischer on the other side, and the ideas of Lilienblum and Pinsker, which were from the secular side of the Jewish people. And they connected together to this idea that we must do something, must changed the path of the Jewish history.
You wanted to quote from Pinsker, no?
Yeah, I think what Jonny quote is really similar, but what they were talking about, and I will try to translate it, but Lillenblum said that the cosmopolites see us Jews as nationalists. The nationalists see us as cosmopolites. The religious people say that we are secular. The secular people say we are too religious. The liberals say we are conservative, and the conservatives say we are liberal. So from these quotes, you can understand the distress or disappointment they felt, because these people were, and also Herzl, Benjamin Zev Herzl is a great example. They felt Herzl was like the model of a young European man. And he was there. He was a lawyer. He was in Vienna. He was in the university. He was in the most respectable newspaper. And he said, after all I've been through, after this emancipation, after I became one of them, I just felt even worse anti-Semitism. And then it made them think, and that was the cradle of the Zionist movement, this feeling of something is not working here. We are the scapegoat. We remain the scapegoat. We were the scapegoat 2,000 years ago, and we are the scapegoats now after the French Revolution, after the spring of the nations in 1480, after the French Revolution, we are still the scapegoats. And they say, okay, if we will not have our own land, our own nation, nothing will change. And this is the background for the appearance of Herzl.
And I think one of the main differences between the Hovevei Zion movement and Herzl's political program is he foresaw a massive influx. He was an incredible diplomat. He arranged all these meetings with the Kaiser, the Sultan. He even met with the Pope, and he was like, Hovevei Zion was smuggling people into Palestine and creating these these practical steps, these small practical steps. And he was saying, no, it needs to be a massive movement of people. But Hovevei Zion, they attended the first Zionist conference, didn't they? Was that in 1897?
Yeah, who attended?
Hovevei Zion, they actually went to.
Yeah, some of them were there. Of course, the people we talked about, like Kalischer, son, I think, and grandchildren were there, like following his steps, and Mohaliver, like, yeah, many of them were there. And I think you mentioned right. What was the greatness of Benjamin Zev Herzl is that he understood that they need to be organized. They need to have a voice, and that's what really helped that he was such a talented newspaper writer, and he knew how to make this kind of propaganda for the Zionist aim and Zionist movement. So he was really, in few years, he was really changing things. After 8 years, he didn't have a long career as Zionist, about 9 years until his early death. But when he started, nobody knew who he is, and after 9 years, when he died, everybody knew, including all the governments of all the empires. So he did something amazing, and he mostly understood that we need to play on the diplomatic field and on the legal field. We have to start and ask for our rights as part of the nations. We have to say, it's like changing the perception and saying we are now already a nation. Now we are asking for our rights. And it was a huge change Herzl make.
Yeah, and you can see Herzl's in the background there, and there's many things that I love about him, but you've got to love a dreamer that all of this, he's got these ideas in his head, and he's thinking, right, I'm gonna go and build a country.
Yeah.
You've got to love that. You've got to admire that. You've got to the self-belief, the work that went into that, the selflessness, the sacrifice. Obviously, he died from ill health. That's got to do something with the fact that he was traveling around meeting with all of these people, the stress of
And all
that.
his children. Mm-hmm.
But the pursuit of this incredible idea is what I love Herzl for the most. And we're gonna do I think a separate podcast is going to be needed when we go into the 20th century, and that was obviously when Herzl died.
Yes.
But by the time we reach the 20th century, the first Aliyah has taken place, and that started really, didn't it? At the same time as those pogroms that we spoke about in Russia and Pinska's auto-emancipation.
Yeah.
Can we I think to finish on this section of Zionism, can we talk a little bit about the first Aliyah?
Yeah, first of all, it's important to understand that the first Aliyah was about 15 years before the first Zionist Congress. So the Zionist Congress was already coming apart, coming together only like 15 years after the already been Zionists that already immigrated, made Aliyah to Israel. Now the first Aliyah was was from Eastern Europe, from Russia and Romania mostly, and it was a kind of project of the lovers of Zion movement, Chovevei Tzion, and when they decided that they're going to the land of Israel, most of them were from religious background of the first Aliyah. They had a religious background, but they say we want to walk the land. We want to be work in agriculture, which is one of the most important Zionist ethos. The agriculture and working the land and become a new Zionist, a new Jew on your own land. So when they arrived to the land of Israel, the first of them came in 1882. It was they were about 26,000 Jews living on the land of Israel, and they almost and after the first Aliyah, it was already about 55,000 Jews. Most of them came between 1881 to 1891. Now we have to remember that it was very, very hard. The conditions in the land of Israel were very hard, so some of them died there. Some of them couldn't stand the conditions and came and went back to Europe or immigrated to families that left the United States. But this core of the first Aliyah is really the first Jews that came from a Zionist mindset to sit on the land of Israel and started to build the infrastructure for the later Aliyah that were much more, the second one in 1914 and etc. They were much more socialist, secular kind of waves of immigration. But the place of the first Aliyah is very important because it was a real grassroots movement that came from Eastern Europe, from these pogroms, and decided we are going there, and they showed the way to the next generation of Zionists. They showed even Benjamin Zev Herzl that he has something already, something to hold on. We have some Jews there. They already built few moshavot, we call it, like small towns, and I think they highly important in the history of Zionism.
Yeah, and
Then let me just add something here because you were talking about the moshavot. So the Emma Moshavot is the other name of Petah Tikva, which is one of the biggest cities in Israel, was already founded then. before the first Aliyah. So it was in 1878 when they founded it. These three Hungarian religious Zionists, which one of the names is very important to remember, is Yehoshua Stampfer. He's the main guy who so Petach Tikva is a Hungarian town in Israel. We are very proud of it.
Yeah, and the first settlements, Tel Aviv hasn't been founded yet, but the first settlements around that area by the end of the 19th century have been formed as well. And this 19th century Zionism, this is not an overpopulated land. We're still talking about in the low hundreds of thousands of people at the moment, and it's a very inhospitable land. And these Zionist land purchases that are being made are completely legal. The Ottomans have brought in land reform laws in the middle of the century, and the Zionists are buying this land from sometimes absentee landowners, or maybe there's Arab farmers that are selling their land to the Zionists at this time. So when we arrive at the end of this century, the Jewish population has doubled due to the ideas of these secular and religious Zionists, and I find it interesting how the secular and the religious come together, because when you're looking at Yehuda Alcala, he's talking about working the land, and he's referring to scripture. And then these socialists are also like, well, we're going to go and create a socialist commune and work the land. So the motivations and the root cause of them going back to the Holy Land is different, but the effect is the same. They're finding their reasons to go back there and to start to work that land, which was essentially you've got people like, most famously, Mark Twain went to Israel in the middle of the century, and I think it was 1868, and he describes what it looks like then. It's a barren dump. It's inhospitable. There's many different people that travel from England as well. They all say the same. And this is really what we can see is the seeds of the state of Israel being planted by the end of the 19th century.
It's very, very descriptive, very picturesque to read it in the book called Jerusalem by Zelma Lagerlöf. It's about a pilgrimage from Sweden. The same writer who wrote Niels Holgersson, The Adventures of Niels Holgersson. So it's a very, very interesting, very good read, very sad in the same time, but very picturesque how they describe Israel then, the land of Israel.
Yeah, and I think that's taken us quite nicely up to the end of the century. I've just got one more question for Amir, really. If there's anybody listening to this podcast and they want to do some further reading, it could be something that you've written, it could be something that you've read yourself. What would you advise?
I think, first of all, there is a really good biography written by Shlomo Avineri about Binyamin Zev Herzl. So I think it's really good. I think you have, wow, there are many books, like there is Ben Zion Netanyahu wrote about the thinkers, the fathers of Zionism, also very good book where we write, I think, about 5 or 6 different people from, I think, Kalischer and to Jabotinsky and etc. So I can do a little list and send you, and maybe you can edit somehow.
That's great.
We'll post it in the description. Yeah. So it's been a pleasure and an honor to speak to you today, Amir. And
Thank you
Éva,
very much.
always.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I
So
love to do it again if we find the opportunity.
Really, you would be able to give us another 1 hour for a session, for a podcast session? That would
Yes,
be really
yes.
great.
I think we need to see what happens next. Now we've reached the end of the century. We need to keep going because it really gets interesting, doesn't it, at the
Yeah,
beginning of the
yeah,
20th century, and we really see the seeds of the conflict when we go into the 20th century, where the Arabs learn if they use violence, they will get what they want, basically. And that's what we see at the beginning of the 20th century when we don't really have a massive amount of violence, do we yet? We've got the Arab population, which are fragmented and splintered, and we have Zionist land purchases
yeah,
and different emigration, but we have kind of a peaceful coexistence that's going on now by the end of the 19th century. Obviously, there's some tension because Islamic texts are very anti-Semitic, so there's always going to be that tension there, but we don't see the massive conflict which is coming
yeah.
perhaps after the second and third aliyahs. Yeah, so it'd be great to catch up and talk about that sometime.
Great.
Again, thank you, Amir, for your time.
Thank you very much, Jonny and Eva. Thank you very much.
And thank you,
Thank,
Éva.
thank you.